Okay, I'd like to introduce our next speaker, Andy Gotz. Andy was the chair of ICALEPCS in 2011. He's been a longtime champion of the TANGO collaboration, and today he's going to be speaking on its transition to industry.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Chris. So the title of the talk is TANGO Controls Moves to Industry, and I realized this morning that the keynote speaker actually gave the talk, but that was unbeknown to me. This talk is about something slightly different, but which is related, of course. And this picture is sort of depicting it. It's about software and sustainability. So how are we sustaining TANGO? And this is what I've been involved with I'd say primarily the last 2 years in terms of TANGO. No one allows me to program anymore. We have, so there are two messages that I really want to get across. And one is that making your software open source is not enough. If you want anyone to use it for any length of time, it has to be sustainable as well. And I think it's very clear that almost no one I know downloads software that hasn't been touched or recompiled since 20 years or 30 years. As soon as you find an interesting project, you look at the date to see, is it alive? So it has to be sustainable. And secondly, I'm going to show by the example of TANGO is how we're currently using industry to make this, make it more sustainable, okay? And I'll give some reasons along the way. So, well, this was my attempt at making a small movie. We have something collectively called TANGO. We try to create a bridge to other people who could help us because, and I'll give you the reasons as well later, we needed some help. And we met in the middle, and this is a sort of the happy ending story. We'll see how this develops with time. Yeah? Just so that you know where this bridge is over here. The bridge is over here. It's actually called the Oxford Bridge. And we originate from this place over here. So this is the bridge where we all go running, jogging, cycling, and everything to relax after all of this hard work. What is sustainability? I think this picture for me is the one that I like a lot. I like looking for pictures when I'm going to talk. And this picture shows sort of that everything is interlinked in a way, that there's not just one part which will make it sustainable. It's like a forest where you have a lot of things that are necessary to make it grow. And I don't know if you know this well-known Buddhist monk, Thich Nhat Hanh, who says if you look at a book, if you look deeply enough, you should see the sun, the clouds, the rain, the trees, everything that went into making that book. And actually our software is the same. If you look deeply enough, you're going to see the people. Behind those people, there's also cloud and sun and rain, and sweat and tears probably as well. So we have to define a little bit what we mean by sustainability, because some of the sustainability, if you look up software sustainability, sometimes they're talking about actually saving CPU cycles. Sustainability, I like this definition which I found on the Software Sustainability Institute in the UK, is that software that you use today has to be available and continue to be improved and supported in the future. Now, I don't know if you know, but the majority of, let's say, the average lifetime of a software project is 10 years, which means that without doing any special extra effort, your software will be around for 10 years. What we're trying to do is make something available for 20 or 30 years. And so we've managed 17 so far, or 18. So we hope, well, now we see that it needs a bit more work than what we had maybe in the beginning. One thing that's very important, I think, this is, if you read some of the papers about software sustainability, is not everything's sustainable, which seems obvious when you say it, but everyone thinks their software will just be sustainable if they put enough effort into it. But if you want something like a software which is very flexible and adaptable to last over a long time, of course, the ecosystem of computing is changing. What's in and what's out, and what is the common way of actually deploying things, all of these things have an influence. And if your design is not sufficiently clean and adaptable, it's not going to be sustainable over 20, 30 years. Certain things don't sustain or need so much effort to be sustained that you won't actually be able to make it to be sustainable. And while preparing also the workshop that we had on the weekend, I've convinced myself, but of course I didn't need much convincing, is that TANGO's concepts are still very modern today. And some of the concepts which come from the 70s have come back into vogue, and you'll find books on them. And some of the reasons of that is Internet of Things, cloud computing, all of this stuff is having a big impact, and they're doing almost exactly what we're doing, but on a much bigger scale. And I think I haven't heard much about those, so for instance, the Internet of Things here during the conference, but I think this is going to have a big impact at future conferences, because they're basically building distributed control systems. So why do we need more than two to tango? Well, one thing we found out is that we have a lot of sites, so there's a big responsibility making sure that this is that this doesn't just die. You know, you have people who are actually investing. We've invested a whole new machine in this. What we've noticed, at least, is that the more sites you have doesn't scale linearly with the number of new developers you have in the core. This is something that seems to be quite decorrelated. You don't forcibly have, with many sites, many core developers. You have to actually identify them. We also found that one thing, the people who were originally there and who were the core developers, they actually move on. Well, in our case, they moved on because they had other more interesting projects, and after 15 years doing the same project, sometimes a gifted programmer would like to do something else as well. So none of them have retired yet, but I don't think they're that far away from it. So we need also, you need a certain number, a critical number of core developers. You have to avoid having just the one guru who's doing everything, because this makes it a very unsustainable solution. And then finally, what we've done is we've actually set up a legal binding contract to, which is of course voluntary. People enter into this contract voluntarily, so that this will help us guarantee the sustainability. This contract today is made up, has 10 participants, 10 members have joined and have signed. 5 of them offer, have financial input as well as resources, human resources, and 5 of them only pay financially towards it. We have 100,000 euros to spend every year so far, and the contract is binding for 5 years, so we can make predictions on that. And the fact that the home institute, one institute, is actually the bank of this or defines the rules, this helps us to, helps people and other institutes to sign this kind of contract. We make, what we're really trying to do is make collective decisions so that it's actually, people are carrying this together. And this, I think, is sort of the secret to what we're trying to do, is trying to not just let individuals make these decisions, but actually collectively carry these new things. We've also simplified the procedure so that people can join with only signing one thing, which is the check. No, they also have to sign the contract. And well, of course, we hope, and our goal is to improve the software. So what do we use this money for? We've used it to identify what we call core industrial partners. And they're called core industrial partners because they are involved in the development of the core. And we've set a sort of minimum set of requirements there. These have to be people who know Tango very well. So we call them power Tango users. These have to be experienced developers and of course, good, professional, but also affordable, because in any industrial project, 100,000 euros is peanuts. So we're doing this on a very small amount of money, with a very small amount of money. And actually what has come out is that the generation startup, the startup generation, is the one that's offering the first services. I think this is not unsurprising, but I think 20 years ago, you didn't have this kind of people ready to take a risk to create a startup. Yeah? And if you look at this movie called Generation Startup, it's very educational to see how tough it is to make a startup work. So we've identified 2 startups, well, who are the main startups we work with, plus 2 service companies, but a very small part. These are large companies, but a very small part of these companies are working with us. And each of them has special skills, so they all have strengths in certain things. And then we've also got help from, we're using an external web hosting company who has skills in Django. And we even got sponsored last year, since now for 2 years, by JetBrains. I don't know if you know the JetBrains tools, but these are sponsoring us so that we can, the core developers can have tools which don't cost us. And these, with the help of these companies, all of these features have been implemented over the last 2 years. So I think if you heard the talk by Renaud on Monday, which was very good, all of these features were detailed. But this just gives you an idea of what we've been able to achieve. We've also sponsored events. So this is an event which was sponsored in Moscow. It was even, I couldn't attend it because it was all in Russian. But when I look at these young guys, I can just see the intensity and the skill set that is in there is it's very empowering, I think. These people are very good. We also, I'll give you just one use case which we worked on, which we sponsored. And I don't know if you know this recent survey by GitHub. Now, GitHub has a lot of users, of course, and they did a survey of what is the worst feature you find in software, in open source software. I don't think you can read it from where you're sitting, but the one which is voted 95% the weakest point of open source software, I'm sure you all know, is documentation. So what we did was we sponsored an event called the Write the Docs Camp, and we had the help from an outside person who built up a mind map of what the current documentation looked like and what was missing and how to reorganize it for all the different kinds of potential users. And we had a lot of fun, yeah? So I think this was probably the biggest fun event that was held in the Tango community in 2017. Some of the people sitting here enjoying the food, we actually lived together for 3 days and cooked together and had learned to know each other. Of course, when we introduce new people from the outside, especially industrial people, into the core, you're going to have to keep that trust. Because people, they're going to say, how do you know the code in there is still trustable? So we have all of these communication means, and I think the workflow, the GitHub workflow is the one which is the biggest guarantee of trust in terms of code, but we still say that the responsibility or the knowledge of the core is with the core members and not with the external companies. So we still keep that. The other way that we've also been involved with industry is that we actually sustain industry, if you like. As you heard this morning, it's been used in the Future Factory, but it's also been used by certain companies. This is a company that builds ultra-high vacuum devices, and they've based the new product around Tango. And they've also built a C# SDK on top of this, and they use all the Windows tools on top of this. Another company that has been has created a startup in Grenoble. They've created a web tool. Without programming, you can create web displays. And if you have a phone which can scan this, well, we'd like to see if you can crash the server today, because we've this will show you the status of the ESRF startup, which is happening right now. One thing that we've got feedback from these startups, because they're also trying to survive, so they go out to industry and they're trying to create markets and trying to get jobs. And although this morning it sounded very attractive, the feedback that we're getting from people in Poland, Russia, Germany and that, is that industry is not adopting open source so easily. In the case of Tango, one of the things is that it's a framework, so it's not really a turnkey solution. It needs resources. And these companies, the big companies or small companies, they have a solution already, so they don't necessarily want to learn a new one. And the guys inside the company don't want to change either. The software is not certified for certain applications, but to my mind, the certification should be done by the people who are actually going to be the resellers of that, and it shouldn't be the community certifying the software. Open source licensing is still a big thing. At least in Eastern Europe, it's still a thing which is not understood, and this coming from the scientific world seems to be something that worries people as well. However, what we do plan is to continue and increase the length of the contracts. We're going to have long-term contracts, and we think we're going to be able to identify new partners as well. The second last slide is to say that we've learned some lessons, which are, okay, sustainability is a lot of work. You have to keep on working at it. It's something which costs almost as much, I'd say. I spend as much time sometimes trying to sustain things as I used to spend programming. You have to be ready for your star programmer to move on, and then there's something you have to plan for. And it's even an opportunity sometimes. I don't think it's always negative. Yeah? I would recommend you to get in with startups. And the final moral of the whole story is that don't just think saying, I'm open source, that it's over. You've still got a long road ahead of you. That's it.
So we have a couple of minutes for questions. Could you say a little bit about what benefits it brings to have this collaboration contract?
Two things. First of all, money. I think the money is really, you know, there's a fantastic talk by someone from Google, I forgot her name, but she was speaking at JupyterCon last month about how money can be used and can enhance open source. Often in the open source community, especially the traditional one, is money is considered evil. But actually we need money. We also need money to sustain it. So the money helps us to do all those things that no one in the collaboration is really motivated to do. Working on the documentation, the amount of time, for instance, that was invested in converting everything to a common format, Sphinx, and then make this all, go through it, all these things, working on the web design. We have a new web design coming out. This isn't what most of the people in the collaboration are being paid to do. They have to run an accelerator. So their money is a big enabler. It's like it just makes that extra step so that you can, these things which don't cost huge amounts of money can be done. And then the second thing that it brings is that this smaller group of people who say, we depend on this, so we're going to put some money into it, they share the responsibility of decision making.
So could you comment a little bit on...
Yeah. Wait a minute, microphone.
Could you comment a little bit on the appropriate role of your steering committee and what their scope is and what's appropriate for them to do?
Let's say the steering committee doesn't decide on, it's supposed to be there to say that they accept the budget, so they have to make decisions about whether we want to spend so much money on this or that. They're also supposed to be there to help make strategic decisions. So if we say we want to, because the philosophy of Tango is to increase the number of things which are considered part of the community, officially part of the community. So if you take, for instance, the REST API, this was sort of officialized by the steering committee. But what the steering committee doesn't do is, for instance, talk about the choice of CMake. CMake was adopted or was proposed by the developers, and then unless someone in the steering committee complains, this just happens. You know, there are a lot of decisions in the coding that are done by the coders and not by the steering committee. But if things seem to be diverging, or if the overall direction is not clear, the role of the steering committee is to make it is to give it a clear strategy so that it stays something coherent. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much, Andy.
Thank you.